Hi guys, I'm Timo of Leap Magazine and you're watching Season Pass, a show that takes you behind the curtains of the eSport industry. Today's panelists are Sovann, Skim, Kim, the former head of Dota at GoSuGamers, Lawrence Malystryx Phillips, the editor-in-chief at JoinDOTA, and Johan Järvinen, former reporter for OnGamers. Welcome, gentlemen. This episode, we're going to talk about saturation of the eSport market, which is something I'm sure most of you will be becoming familiar with, if nothing else. Esports, like traditional sports, obviously, as it rises and grows, we see an increase in leagues and little tournaments and the amateur scenes and all these things. But because real sports are so ingrained into our culture, our organizations and everything, we don't necessarily see this as a problem because we have the major things to follow on the side. But from an esport perspective, where we're still pretty much going rogue, it's still the Wild West in many ways, does this oversaturation present a problem? I mean, we see, for instance, in Counter-Strike, with the lack of a full-on, real, dominant league, we have all these tournaments all the time. But that, you risk making these tournaments feel less important, maybe? Or is it a good thing? Is it a good thing that we're spreading this and getting people in? What's your take on it?
I think competition is always good. I think it's very important for the industry that as many people as possible try to produce the best product. For example, ESL One Frankfurt it's a very unique tournament, and this is one of those tournaments where people just remember it just because they have a unique structure, they have a unique appeal because they're in a stadium, they have super production. And I think it's up to everybody in this industry. If they want a piece of the cake, they have to make the best bid. So I think it's actually very good that we have this kind of stuff. Sure, you still see a lot of tournaments or a lot of products that are still unpolished, that you can just say, oh my God, they still need at least 2 years to work on this. But at the same time, when they do work on that, and well, they're forced to work on that. That's, I think, a very good part of it. Obviously, yeah, there's a downside. Even as a journalist, you still need to kind of keep track of everything. It's difficult to tell stories about certain events because, frankly, sometimes there's not a story. If a tournament runs on for 4 months or something, it's difficult to keep track of everything. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's a very positive effect.
I'm going to butt in and disagree with you, Skim. I think there's always a story. I think there's always a story to tell. It's just... it becomes harder to tell them, sure, but I think if you know, when you know a lot of the context, you can find that angle. And even if it's not being defined previously, you get to define that angle, and that is sort of a lot of these teams, especially when they're new on the scene, there isn't an established story told about them, and that's sort of perhaps the most gratifying experience because you get to actually create that storyline. So even though there's a lot going on, that also means that there's a lot of opportunities for doing that work.
I think more tournaments is bad because in for example the Premier League, you've got the FA Cup, which is for the amateur teams to get in. You've got the Premier League every week. You've got one match to watch. It's League of Legends, I don't play it, but that's a good system. That's a system where everyone cares. You've got a system, teams are in there for so many months, and you know when a season is, you know when teams change, and you can be excited. If you've got random tournaments everywhere, their relevance is not about team, it's about prize pool, where it's located, stadium or Madison Square or TI. It's all about how big the company is, but not necessarily how good the event is. So I think you need a league that lasts 2 months and the teams invest their time into this and they don't do other games. And I think every game would be extremely exciting. And then when teams meet each other, I remember last year was worse, you had one team met each other 4 times in a month. That's terrible. Why do you want the same team to meet each other 4 times in a month? It doesn't mean anything. You need it rare, they haven't played each other for, 3 months.
Liverpool and Manchester going at it.
Yeah, recently it's better. For example, in Dota, Empire and EG and Cloud9, they're very selective. So when they do meet each other, you're like, whoa, finally they haven't played each other, what will happen? So I think more tournaments is definitely bad, but obviously more companies involved in terms they want money, they want to be involved. But I think for a fan, I think you need less tournaments that are more high quality. I think.
Yeah, but if you think about the EG-Vici matchup, that's we've seen that time and again during the season, and it's been one of these constant things about this season between 2014 and 2015. And just because they play each other so regularly, it's a very good barometer for where these teams are and where the scenes are. And you look back at that history always, and you always have these touch points. So,
but not everyone. What you're looking at like a viewer from your point of view. Do you watch every match? They might be like, oh, regional.
Yeah, I mean that's fair enough. Like there are a lot of people who aren't as crazy as
you're like
1%
1% of the community. I bet 99% they don't know what the leagues are. They just want to know what's a good game. And I saw that last week. I don't want to see that again. I want to see something different. But they can't see something different. So.
But at the same time, it's also the team's obligations. I mean, if a team accepts every tournament invitation and is playing every week against the same teams over and over again, it's sort of also their own fault because. I mean, they're also at the same time complaining, oh no, there's so many tournaments that we have to play.
They're burned now, obviously. I mean, it depends if you really want money, then do more tournaments.
But to cut in there, actually, because you touch upon something a little interesting in this regard. Do you think, in this case, that it should be up to the team? If we're talking a professional sport, should the team actually have a say in this? I mean, you don't ask United whether they're ready for the next match. You don't ask Juventus, whether they're ready to play. Fact is, they're in a league. They've been seeded. They will play. And if you're going to do something like, seriously, you're going to do it professionally. Do you really want to leave it up to this kind of like cozy little LAN feeling? Isn't that pretty much what defines amateurs? And amateur leagues are fine, but if the industry is trying to grow, is that a problem? Do we want to shed ourselves of this amateur mentality, or do we want to go like full Counter-Strike on it and just embrace it in its magnitude?
Well, at the same time, there's no, at least outside of League of Legends, there's no governing body that actually makes sure that we have this sort of mentality or have this sort of, oh hey, you're actually scheduled for that match, you're definitely playing that. Okay, yeah, but like in Dota, StarCraft is dead. But in Dota, CS:GO, or Hearthstone even, there's no governing body that says, hey, we're gonna do this. There's only these certain tournaments. There's only these certain leagues that are appointed to whatever. So it's difficult. It's still, I mean, we've talked about this in previous episodes before. It's still sort of Wild West in that regard, whereas everybody just wants a piece of the cake, and there's nobody that regulates them properly. That just says, hey, you can't actually do that. So right now, it's literally just really on the teams to actually make sure that everything is properly scheduled or properly done. Because I've dealt with teams before, I've managed a team before, I've scheduled for teams before, and it is really, a lot of teams just take too much on their plate. They just, with no regard for, oh, actually this is not going to work out with this tournament. We're just going to deal with it on that day. So it's still on the teams to meet that certain level of professionalism.
I'll say quickly just that these teams, they take on a lot, but that's especially true for like the mid-level teams, the teams that don't get the direct invites, because you're playing a lot of qualifiers and you don't know, because a lot of these qualifiers are really stacked, and especially in Europe we're starting to get to this point where if you're in the qualifier, that's even if you think you're really good, you have no guarantee that you're actually going to get to the LAN finals and so forth. So you have to play in everyone. And that means that, and if you don't then want to be that asshole who says, sorry, we qualified for your LAN, but we're not going to show up, which does happen. But if you don't want to be that one...
I'm even going to cut that off right there. We're talking about professional sport here.
Dropouts is just ridiculous. There are teams that just say, oh, actually, we signed up, we're not going to play. They should get fined. They should be fined, and they should get punished. You can't leave mid-season. You should be... every tournament should be... team should be congratulated. We had like JDL... JoinDOTA League, I can't remember, some team dropped out like 1 week before it started. We can't do anything. If they were contractually obliged, then there should be a punishment. Because teams just do like whatever, like they have 2 matches scheduled near to each other, the first one lasts too long and they just move the next one. And that's
pretty much it, because I mean, we're talking about eSports. We're talking about eSports. We're not covering the local LAN net cafe tournament. We're talking about eSports.
But this is how the Dota climate works. Everyone wants to say that, we're getting the best teams because we're letting everyone have their chance. And that means that we have qualifiers for literally every tournament. And while that is good in some sense, that does mean that there are a lot of teams who are forced into this position. And personally, I would prefer that, you know, if you're a top level competition, if you're a competition like ESL, I don't think you need to serve the community anymore. I think you can just go out there and say, we know which are the best teams, we've seen them prove that, let's just bring them in. And you don't need a qualifier for that.
No, but this happened like 5 years ago with Warcraft 3. The scene was centered around China and Korea, and what they did is they had invite-only tournaments. So you just had the same 8 teams all the time, and then the other teams died because they had no way to finance themselves. So you should have balanced invites, like e.g., for example, they like to play. They think that they shouldn't play the US qualifiers. They think we're good enough. This is for Dota 2. Give us a direct invite. I think it should be, I don't know, 8 teams, 2 direct invites, like ESL, 6 qualifiers. I think you need a balance. Otherwise, because other teams are just going to die because they're like, oh, we're not getting invited.
The point is, like, for me, ESL stands that highly. An event like this stands that highly that they can be selective.
To spread it out, though,
events
obviously.
that are like one tier below, those are the ones where you should be able to prove yourself.
But judging then, looking at the bigger picture, talking about esports in general, not just the Dota scene, we've seen the different aspects of how this can work. The question is, which method is necessarily like preferable? Because obviously it's growing. We all agree somehow that it should evolve. It should become something more. We have, you know, like Counter-Strike on the anarchistic side in one direction, where everything is just one week to the other, and we have League of Legends, which is very rigid, I think, on the other end of the spectrum, and Dota somewhere in between. The question is, to some extent, to which degree does the saturation of non-important matches actually hurt the esport coverage? Because your viewers, like you said as well, you mentioned it, viewers won't care if it's just the same match over again. So without an actual league structure, does this benefit the scene? Does it help growth because more people get to fight over the scraps? Or does it now at this stage, when we've grown to a certain size, does it hurt the industry because it's not focused by now and it kind of needs to be?
Depends on the number of teams. I think it's one, how involved is the person who makes the game. So Riot is heavily involved. And for example, Counter-Strike, the viewer, how many good teams are there? Are there 16? Are there 20? Are there 25? In Dota, how many good teams are there? Maybe 8. How many do they want to watch? I think it's dependent on the game. Counter-Strike community, generally a Counter-Strike fan is like adrenaline and pump, like, yeah man, let's fucking do it. And then Dota's like some nerd, like, oh, I'm going to build this magic stick. Okay, it's different. It's different, like, spectrum is like what a fan is. So Counter-Strike, I think they like this chaos. I bet they really love this chaos. And then I think, yeah, based on the fan, I think the game. So Counter-Strike is like a fast-paced, adrenaline pump game, and Dota 2 is like sort of dragged out, you know, towers and farming and whatever. So I think it's based on the game and how involved the person who makes the game is in it. So I don't think you can have one system across every single game. I think every game has to have its own system. So League of Legends, that's their system. Dota 2, I don't know if we have a system. And then Counter-Strike Chaos, I think they like Chaos, I think.
Thorin likes to compare us to the tennis system more so than these traditional sports leagues and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty apt, sort of, where you can have these various levels of AP tournaments and whatnot, and you can have this sort of chaos, but it's a kind of organized chaos. And I think like that's probably where we're more headed with Dota right now. But I don't know if it's the best solution though. Like,
what about you?
There is a balance.
What's your take on it then?
Well, I do think that a lot more, all these tournaments, just from a journalistic perspective, I think it's actually challenging to actually just cover everything because, again, there's so many tournaments where you just they're all happening at the same time, and I think for the journalists it's just a challenge to make sure that you can report everything and just actually in a way that the viewer can digest it properly. For example, I used to do weekly write-ups so that the viewers could actually just read, oh, this is what happened in this tournament this week, you know. As for the esports structure overall, I think I completely agree with what Lauren said. I think it's very dependent on what game it is, because if we look at CS:GO viewer numbers every week, like there's probably LAN almost every week. Literally every time I tune into Twitch, there's esports, there's CS:GO tournament. Like there's a LAN right now, Starlighter. So I think it's really dependent on the game. In Dota, especially, we had a discussion about, oh, it's such a boring game. We're all burned out. We don't want to watch it anymore. has this ever happened in CS:GO? I don't really feel like, because it's just a very dynamic game. It's very.
I think a lot of that discussion was also just we were at a point where the patch and the game just created games that weren't that exciting. Now it's more dynamic. Now it's better. I think right now you'll probably get less complaints to some extent.
But at the same time, yeah, you're completely right. But at the same time, just because the game was at such a state, the amount of tournaments certainly didn't help. Because at the time where the game was super boring to play and watch, suddenly you still had all these tournaments that were going on.
I think that's because it's like Final Fantasy VII, right? They're remaking Your Childhood Dream. Counter-Strike 1.6 had a massive community, and it didn't have the funding. And then we're saying we're going to remake your favorite game. They don't care if the tournaments are rubbish. They're like, my game is back. It's like Final Fantasy VII. That's what it is. Counter-Strike goes Final Fantasy VII.
I'm gonna wrap it up with that. Again, nice finish. Obviously, that's it for this episode. For more on Season Pass, stay tuned to leakmac.com. Thank you, gentlemen.